2 Maccabees chapter 7. The martyrdom of 7 brothers. It happened also that 7 brothers and their mother were arrested and were being compelled by the king under torture with whips and cords to partake of unlawful swine's flesh. One of them, acting as their spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our father." The king fell into a rage and gave orders that pans and cauldrons be heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded that the tongue of their spokesman be cut out, and that they scalp him and cut off his hands and his feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mothers looked on. When he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire, still breathing, and to fry him in a pan. The smoke from the pan spread widely, but the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die nobly, saying, "The Lord God is watching over us, and in truth has compassion on us, as Moses declared in his song, which bore witness against the people to their faces, when he said, 'And he will have compassion on his servants.'" After the first brother had died in this way, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore off the skin of his head with his hair, and asked him, "Will you eat rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" He replied in the language of his fathers and said to him, "No." Therefore he in turn underwent tortures as the first brother had done. And when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wreck, you dismiss us from this present life, but the King of the universe will raise us up to an everlasting renewal of life, because we have died for his laws." After him, the third was the victim of their sport. When he was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said nobly, "I got these from heaven, and because of his law I disdain them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. When he too had died, they maltreated and tortured the fourth in the same way. And when he was near death, he said, "One cannot but choose to die at the hands of men, and to cherish the hope that God gives of being raised again by him. But for you, there will be no resurrection to life." Next, they brought forward the fifth and maltreated him. But he looked at the king and said, "Because you have authority over among men, mortal though you are, you do what you please, but do not think that God has forsaken our people. Keep on and see how his mighty power will torture you and your descendants." After him, they brought forward the sixth. And when he was about to die, he said, "Do not deceive yourself in vain, for we are suffering these things on your account, because of your sins against our own God. Therefore, astounding things have happened, but do not think that you will go unpunished for having tried to fight against God." The mother was especially admired and worthy of honorable memory. Though she saw her 7 sons perish within a single day, she bore it with good courage because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their fathers. Filled with a noble spirit, she fired her woman's reasoning with a man's courage and said to them, I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you life and not breath, nor I who set it in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the Creator of the Lord, who shaped the beginning of man and devised the origin of all things, will in His mercy give life and breath back to you again. Since you now forgot yourselves for the sake of His laws. Antiochus felt that he was being treated with contempt, and he was suspicious of her reproachful tone. The youngest brother being still alive, Antiochus not only appealed to him in words, but promised with oaths that he would make him rich and enviable if he would turn from the ways of his fathers, and that he would take him for his friend and entrust him with public affairs. Since the young man would not listen to him at all, the king called the mother to him and urged her to advise the youth to save himself. After much urging on his part, she undertook to persuade her son, but learning and leaning close to him, she spoke in their native tongues as follows, deriding the cruel tyrant. My son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years and have reared you and brought you up to this point in your life and have taken care of you. I beseech you, my child, to look at the heaven and the earth and see everything that is in them and recognize that God did not make them out of things that existed. Thus also mankind comes into being. Do not fear this butcher, but prove worthy of you and your brothers. Accept death, so that in God's mercy you may get you back again with your brothers. While she was still speaking, the young man said, What are you waiting for? I will not obey the king's command, but I obey the command of the law that was given to our fathers through Moses. But you, who have contrived all sorts of evil against the Hebrews, will certainly not escape the hands of God, for we are suffering because of our own sins. And if our living God is angry for a little while to rebuke and discipline us, He will again be reconciled with His own servants. But you, unholy wreck, you most defiled of all men, do not be elated in vain and puffed up by uncertain hopes when you raise your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing God, for our brothers have after enduring a brief suffering, have drunk of ever-flowing life under God's covenant. But you, by the judgment of God, will receive just punishment for your arrogance. I, like my brothers, give up body and life for the law of our fathers, appealing to God to show mercy soon to our nation, and by afflictions and plagues to make you confess that He alone is God, and through me and my brothers to bring to an end the wrath of the Almighty, which has justly fallen on our whole nation. The king fell into a rage and handled him worse than the others, being exasperated at his scorn. So he died in his integrity, putting his whole trust in the Lord. Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme torture. 2 Maccabees chapter 8. the revolt of Judas Maccabeus. But Judas, who was also called Maccabeus, and his companions secretly entered the village and summoned their kinsmen and enlisted those who had continued in the Jewish faith. And so they gathered about 6,000 men. They besought the Lord to look upon the people who were oppressed by all, and to have pity on the temple which had been profaned by ungodly men, and to have mercy on the city which was being destroyed and about to be levelled to the ground, and to hearken to the blood that cried out to him, and to remember also the lawless destruction of the innocent babies and the blasphemies committed against his name, and to show his hatred of evil. As soon as Maccabeus got his army organized, the Gentiles could not withstand him, for his wrath of the Lord had turned to mercy. Coming without warning, he would set fires to towns and villages. He captured strategic positions and put to flight not a few of the enemies. He found the nights most advantageous for such attacks, and talk of his valor spread everywhere. When Philip saw that the man was gaining grounds little by little, and that he was pushing ahead with more frequent successes, he wrote to Ptolemy, the governor of Syria and Phoenicia, for aid to the king's government. And Ptolemy promptly appointed Nicanor, the son of Patroclus, one of the king's chief friends, and sent him in command of no fewer than 20,000 Gentiles of all nations, to wipe out the whole race of Judea. He associated with him Gorgias, a general and a man of experience in military service. Nicanor determined to make up for the king the tribute due to the Romans, 2,000 talents, by selling the captured Jews into slavery, and he immediately sent to the cities of the seacoast, inviting them to buy Jewish slaves and promising to hand over 90 slaves for a talent, and not expecting the judgment from the Almighty that was about to overtake him. Preparation for battle. Word came to Judas concerning Nicanor's invasion, and when he told his companions of the arrival of the army, those who were cowardly and distrustful of God's justice ran off and got away. Others sold all their remaining property, and at the same time besought the Lord to rescue those who had been sold by the ungodly Nicanor before he ever met them. If not for their own sake, yet for the sake of the covenants made with their fathers, and because he had called them by his holy and gracious, glorious name. But Maccabeus gathered his men together to the number of 6,000 and exhorted them not to be frightened by the enemy, and not to fear the great multitude of Gentiles who were wickedly coming against them, but to fight nobly, keeping before their eyes the lawless outrage which the Gentiles had committed against the holy place, and the torture of the derided city, and besides the overthrow of their ancestral way of life. For they trust to arms and acts of daring, he said, but you trust in the Almighty God, who is able with a single nod to strike down those who are coming against us, and even the whole world. Moreover, he told them of the times when help came to their ancestors, both the types of Sennacherib, when 185,000 perished, and the time of the battle with the Galatians that took place in Babylonia, when 8,000 in all went into the affair, with 4,000 Macedonians. And when the Macedonians were hard pressed, the 8,000, by the help that came to them from heaven, destroyed 120,000 and took much booty. Judas defeats Nicanor. With these words, he filled them with good courage and made them ready to die for their laws and their country. Then he divided his army into 4 parts. He appointed his brothers also, Simon and Joseph and Jonathan, each to command a division, putting 1,500 men under each. Besides, he appointed Eleazar to read aloud from the holy book and gave them the watchword, God's help. Then, leading the first division himself, he joined battle with Nicanor. With the Almighty as their ally, they slew more than 9,000 of the enemy and wounded and disabled most of Nicanor's army and forced them all to flee. They captured the money of those who had come to buy them as slaves, and after pursuing them for some distance, they were obliged to return because the hour was late. For it was the day before the Sabbath, and for that reason they did not continue their pursuit. And when they had collected the arms of the enemy and stripped them of their spoils, they kept the Sabbath, giving great praise and thanks to the Lord, who had preserved them for that day and allotted it to them as the beginning of mercy. After the Sabbath, they gave some of the spoils to those who had been tortured and to widows and orphans, and distributed the rest among themselves and their children. When they had done this, they made common supplication and besought the merciful Lord to be wholly reconciled by his servants. Judas defeats Timothy and Bacchides. In encounters with the forces of Timothy and Bacchides, they killed more than 20,000 of them and got possession of some exceedingly high strongholds, and they divided very much plunder, giving to those who had been tortured, and to the orphans and widows, and also to the aged, shares equal to their own. Collecting the arms of the armed enemy, they stored them all carefully in strategic places and carried the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. They killed the commander of Timothy's forces and most unholy man, and one who had greatly troubled the Jews. While they were celebrating the victory in the city of their fathers, they burned those who had set fire to the sacred gates. Callisthenes and some others who had fled into one little house. So these received the proper recompense for their impiety. The thrice accursed Nicanor, who had brought the 1,000 merchants to buy the Jews, having been humbled with the help of the Lord by opponents whom he regarded as of the least account, took off his splendid uniform and made his way alone like a runaway slave across the country till he reached Antioch, having succeeded chiefly in the destruction of his own army. Thus, he who had undertaken the secure tribe for the Romans by the capture of the people of Jerusalem proclaimed that the Jews had a defender, and that therefore the Jews were invulnerable because they followed the laws ordained by him. 2 Maccabees chapter 9. The last campaign of Antiochus Epiphanes. About that time, as it happened, Antiochus had retreated in disorder from the region of Persia, for he had entered the city called Persepolis and attempted to rob the temples and control the city. Therefore, the people rushed to the rescue with arms, and Antiochus and his men were defeated, with the result that Antiochus was put to flight by the inhabitants and beat a shameful retreat. While he was Ecbatana, news came to him of what had happened to Nicanor and the forces of Timothy. Transported with rage, he conceived the idea of turning upon the Jews the injury done by those who had put them to flight. So he ordered his charioteer to drive without stopping until he completed the journey. But the judgment of heavens rode with him, for in his arrogance he said, "When I get there, I will make Jerusalem a cemetery of Jews." But the all-seeing God, the Lord of Israel, struck him an incurable and unseen blow. As soon as he ceased speaking, he was seized with a pain in his bowels, for which there was no relief, with sharp internal tortures. And that very justly, for he had tortured the bowels of others with many and strange inflictions. Yet he did not in any way stop his insolence, but was even more filled with arrogance, breathing fire in his rage against the Jews, and giving orders to hasten the journey. And so it came about that he fell out his chariot as it was rushing along, and the fall was so hard as to torture every limb of his body. Thus he who had just been thinking that he could command the waves of the sea in his superhuman arrogance, and imagining that he could weigh the high mountains in a balance, was brought down to earth and carried in a litter, making the power of God manifest to all. And so the ungodly man's body swarmed with worms, and while he was still living in anguish and pain, his flesh rotted away, and because of his stench, the whole army felt revulsion at his decay. Because of his intolerable stench, no one was able to carry the man who a little while before had thought that he could touch the stars of the heaven. Then it was that, broken in spirit, he began to lose much of his arrogance and to come in his senses under the scourge of God, for he was tortured with pain every moment. And when he could not endure his own stench, he uttered these words: "It is right to be subject to God, and no mortal should think that he is equal to God." Antiochus makes a promise to God. Then the abominable fellow made a vow to the Lord, who would no longer have mercy on him, stating that the holy city, which he was hastening to level to the ground and to make a cemetery, he was now declaring to be free, and the Jews, whom he had not considered worthy burying, but had planned to throw out with their children to the beasts for the birds to pick, he would make all of them equal to the city of Athens. And the holy sanctuary, which he had formerly plundered, he would adorn with the finest offerings, and the holy vessels he would give back, all of them many times over, and the expenses incurred for the sacrifices he would provide them his own revenues. And in addition to all this, he also would become a Jew and would visit every inhabited place to proclaim the power of God. But when his sufferings did not in any way abate, for the judgment of God had justly come upon him, he gave up all hopes for himself and wrote to the Jews the following letter in the form of supplication. This was its content. Antiochus' letter and death. To his worthy Jewish citizens, Antiochus, their king, and general sends hearty greetings and good wishes for their health and prosperity. If you and your children are well, and your affairs are as you wish, I am glad, as my hope is in heaven. I remember with affliction your esteem and goodwill, and on my way back from the region of Persia, I suffered an annoying illness, and I have deemed it necessary to take it through for the general security of all. I did not despair of my condition, for I have good hope of recovering from my illness. But I observed that my father, on the occasion when he made expeditions into the upper country, appointed his successor, so that if anything unexpected happened or any unwelcome news came, the people throughout the realm would not be troubled, for they would know whom the government was left. Moreover, I understand how the princes along the borders and the neighbors to my kingdom keep watching for opportunities and waiting to see what will happen. So I have appointed my son Antiochus to be king, whom I have often entrusted and commended to most of you when I hastened off to the upper province, and I have written to him what is written here. I therefore urge and beseech you to remember the public and private services rendered to you, and to maintain your present goodwill, each of you towards me and my son, for I am sure that he will follow my policy and will treat you with moderation and kindness. So the murderer and blasphemer, having endured the most intense suffering, such as he had inflicted on others, came to the end of his life by the most pitiable fate among the mountains in a strange land. And Philip, one of his courtiers, took his body home. Then, fearing the son of Antiochus, he betook himself to Ptolemy Philometor in Egypt.